Hey everybody, Kirkwolf here. Before I have mentioned a little bit before my involvement with a pyramid scheme that took a hold of me in 2017. A few weeks ago I had an interview with Precision Independent Media with their video series of the Slave Circle, which they've done a documentary on, and then a bunch of extras where more and more people came up to testify against what had happened to them. There's a series of videos. And after mine, I felt good. I felt really, really good. I felt like a huge weight was off my back just talking with someone who has been through what I had been through and getting it out in a format to show as many people as possible to hopefully limit the number of people that fall into these traps. That feeling was very good. Towards the end of the interview with the very, very nice man named Alex, he had told me that the foreword that I wrote, the document I gave him with all my stories, should be out there. I'll be sure to make a video about it when it goes up, but what I wanted to do was I wanted to read my document. I wanted to read my story of what had happened to me with this awful pyramid scheme, and I just want to share my story. This is going to be just a reading. Maybe I'll talk a little bit at the end, but these are pre-wrote words. Normally I kind of do things freehand, but every time I try to talk, it kind of gets jumbled in my brain, so I have listed everything. And I do forgive my lack of eye contact. I'll just be reading my document here. My name is Kirk. I graduated from Widener University in May 2017. My original plan in life was to go to graduate school for physical therapy. But when I got to graduate school, it was apparent it was not for me, so I dropped out. Leaving graduate school with just a degree in psychology, I was pretty desperate for a job, since I had crippling student loan debt to pay. As you may know, a bachelor's in psychology is pretty frowned upon, and more than likely you won't get a good job with it. I was looking at my college's website for career opportunity when I found this job in Delaware for this Cydcor pyramid scheme. What I saw when I saw that page on the website was a group of people smiling together in professional business attire with slogans like "Best Place to Work in 2016" and "Leading Innovator of Client Retention." They used a lot of fancy sounding words, and like an idiot I fell for it. I sent an application and I got a response surprisingly quick, within 24 hours. A nice woman spoke to me on the phone asking if I would like to come in for an interview. Being desperate, I gladly said yes and Ubered over to Delaware for the office. I remember how excited I was. I felt like I would crush the interview and prove all those people wrong who told me I'm just a worthless psych major and my degree is useless. When I got there, I walked into the room and I did think it looked a little bit odd. I was sitting with a lot of other people, I assumed either clients or other interviewers for the day. The office was a lot smaller than expected, and I noticed a distinct lack of furniture. They had a little TV on the stand away from the secretary's desk, and I was a little put off by it. The other people around me were a lot older, some not even in suits, so that added to my confusion for the interview. I was greeted warmly by the owner. He was young, in good shape, but he gave me kind of a car salesman vibe, but more charismatic. He asked me general questions about college and what I do, etc., and I felt like a basic interview with him. But then I was turned over to his associate, who would later become my leader. This brought me to the actual interview. My interviewer, who I'll call Steve, was an overweight man, dressed nicely with a big smile. I do admit it was pleasant talking to him, but then once the interview started, the red flags came. He told me we were a subsidiary of Verizon, which was false, and what we focused on is client retention. I asked him what that meant, and he told me we meet clients face to face. The word client was very manipulative because it infers that this is a business job, not some sort of scumbag door-to-door salesman job. Then we got to the commission. He made it sound like a dream job, a base rate of $500 a week plus whatever you make extra. To a soon-to-be graduate with no hope, that sounded amazing. If you work hard, you can easily make $1,000 a week, and that floored me. That made it sound like a nice, cushy office job, filing reports, meeting bigwigs face-to-face to discuss services. Looking back, I do remember this look he gave me, this satisfied look of, we have an easy sucker here. We shot the breeze after that, and he asked what I liked. Turns out we had a lot in common. He liked superheroes, video games, music, etc. It kind of pushed my red flags back a little because I felt that he could relate to me. I mean, no one who is like me would fall for a pyramid scheme, right? Wrong. One small detail, I did have this interview in 2016 before I graduated in the May of 2017. So the idiot who read my application initially didn't see that I was graduating in another 7 months. They were surprised I showed up in the June of 2017, but I really wish I didn't. Part 2, the field. I'm sure you're a bit tired hearing the process of the 4, 5s, and 8s and C factors, etc. I won't labor those details, so I'll just break into the horror stories of the field. The field is what these pyramid schemes call when they go out to sell door to door. Steve had hyped up the field to oblivion on my first day with him. He didn't tell me to wear street clothes, so here I am in a clean dress shirt and a jacket on a hot June day. They also forced me to drive because I was one of the few people in the office who had a car. Also, he was messing around like a jackass and ran a red ink pen on my leg, so there was a long red streak that I could never wash out of my white dress pants. So the first day was going great. We arrived in this lower income area of Delaware, after stopping at a KFC for lunch, which I was not thrilled with. We parked my car on the side street and got walking. I was horrified. They never said anything about working outside in the heat, rain, snow, selling Verizon files door to door to strangers. I had asked him if people knew we were coming. He lied to me and said yes, Verizon sends mailings. Even if they did, people would just assume it's spam anyway in my mind. Since I was the one who drove, I couldn't leave him stranded there, so I stayed. It was hot, and we were walking around in circles in this neighborhood talking to strangers hoping to get some sales. I do got to admit, Steve was a really good salesman, but he wasn't a very smart person. He had me do the initial knocking in the first part of the pitch. We actually made a few sales that day, and the money was looking pretty good. I remember, though, that an old woman whose door I knocked on walked up and told me to go fuck myself. I was pretty shocked when someone said that to me without me really saying that much of anything to them. When I told Steve, he laughed and said she was a bitch and went back to the office for the end of the day. The end of the day was like a mad party. People yelling, banging walls, and ringing bells. It was intoxicating, and it made me feel good to ring the bell and dance around. The doubt was still in my mind, though. The next morning for day 2, I tried calling out with an excuse as a way to break the hold on me so I could look for another job. That scumbag manipulated me into coming back in, and I stayed for about 6 months. So eventually, in the training process, we got to a point where I was doing all of the work, and Steve would use his code for the final purchase. Eventually, we got one in my code, but something kind of funny happened when I saw my check. My check had a $200 first bonus, taxed to high heaven, of course, but the check was about $300 in comparison to the $500 or so I was expecting without the bonus. Turns out Steve was taking full credit for the sales I made, even when I did most of the work and didn't even split all of them with me. To add that, he told me he'd split with me any sales that I did most of the work of. That was a lie like everything else. Despite this, I stayed like a fool, and since I was done with training, I was on my own now. The next goal was to become a leader. Like a made man in a mafia film, I coveted this title. I wanted so badly to be a leader, but my sales weren't quite high enough. I'd make about $400 or so a week, but that wasn't enough. You had to make $500 to get promoted. I was not a good salesman, but their hooks were already in me to push me to work harder. One week I made $515 and was waiting with hopeful eyes to hear our newest leader, Kirk, to thunderous applause. To my surprise, someone else got the promotion over me. I was legitimately heartbroken. Some more stories from the field. I hated rich communities. The poor people always heard you out because they understood what it was like to be poor, and sometimes we could genuinely give them a decent deal on cable and internet. However, the rich people were a cruelty that I have never seen before. They would curse at you, throw things, pull weapons, call the police, threaten to hurt you. It was horrifying. When I was stuck in this pyramid scheme, I wasn't making enough to pay my rent, so I had maxed out my credit cards over the course of that 6-month period. It got to the point where I could barely eat, and I was legitimately starving. I would go to these grand houses in these wealthy neighborhoods like a little kid begging in a Charles Dickens book, genuinely looking to get people a good deal and save money. But it was always a constant assault from upper-class people calling me scum and garbage without listening to what I had to say. Also, to add that, the people within the scam had always used my car. They always made me to drive, and always made me pay for my own gas to drive from Pennsylvania to Delaware 6 times a week, and all over both states. So that continued to hurt my wallet more and more. Steve was always a hard part about the field, too. Going out with him, he would try to help me when I started by trying to line up sales for me. 100% of the time, these people slammed the door in my face because Steve was too stupid to realize that they were not going to buy anything. He wasted my time while he pranced around hitting bell and gong and etc., etc. Once he did promise me that he had a good sale lined up, so I walked all the way across the development to this house. I knocked on the door, smile on my face, saying, "Hi, Steve said you were interested in saving money, and I'm here to see if I can help." The older woman at the door looked at me with disgust and said, "We don't need help from trash people like you. Stop bothering us," and slammed the door. I confronted Steve on it, and his response was, "Duh, I don't know. You must have messed up the sale." One time we were selling out in New Jersey, and the day before I spoke to a man who said, "Yeah, sure, I'd love to sign up. Come back tomorrow when my partner's home and we'll take it." Next day I came back, rang the bell, no answer. Came back a little bit later, no answer. I came back at the end of the day trying once more, only to be greeted with hatred from the same happy face yesterday. He screamed at me, "You little fucker! You've been ringing my doorbell all fucking day. My doorbell won't start ringing because of you. Fuck off!" The door slammed in my face and I didn't get the sale. Once in the summertime during a heat wave, I was so worked up that I had vomited all over myself. I didn't have a change of clothes, so I drove all the way back to my apartment, washed my clothes, and then went back out to sell. Naturally, this took multiple hours to do so I didn't make any sales that day. When I showed up empty-handed that night, Steve commented, "Why didn't you sell today?" I told him flat out that I had vomited on myself and had no change of clothes and had to go back and clean up. His only response was, "You should have sold anyway." There was another time when I actually ran into one of the physical therapy professors from my old college. I had hoped they'd remember my face and would at least be friendly to me. They weren't. They didn't remember my face, they belittled me for lying about going to Widener, and cursed me off their property. I didn't know the professor long enough for them to remember my face, to be fair, but it was disheartening to be treated that way. Multiple times it had downpoured rain, and of course once it downpours rain, your sales is pretty much over. Every time we didn't make money while it stormed to rain, we were insulted for not being committed enough to the job. If you remember the eclipse from 2017, we were forced into the blazing sun with no eye protection. Another time when I was in New Jersey, 2 hours away, and I drove the people from my office who attended that meeting, so like 4 people, I was bullied by police for a bogus speeding charge. Steve, when confronted, laughed at me because I drive like a grandmother. When I told him about the ticket, which was about $120, he laughed and said, "That sucks." I tried asking the owner if he would be willing to reimburse me because I was the one who did all the driving for all of his employees. He also laughed in my face with a hard no. Another time, my voice was so hoarse from speaking that I wasn't able to speak without sounding like a smoker. I asked for the day off, and the owner sneered at me, telling me no, I had to go out and work. It was pretty painful talking to people, but my throat was so sore. I did have a few sales, but I think it might have been out of pity. I didn't speak to this person too much, but there was a very nice woman who was a door-to-door salesperson in our office. She had cancer. Active cancer. And they forced her out into the field every day. I don't know what kind or how severe, but she was a really good salesman. It's just a shame that they forced her to go out and do all that hard work. There was someone who came in after me to someone else's team named Rick. Rick was loved by the owner because Rick was a killer salesman. He would hit $1,000 every week like a machine. He did so well that they got a day off from work, what a concept, to go to a beach party with the owner and other owners of the area, and the consultant. He was having a great time since they were grooming him to be the next manager. It was all the other reps heard about, and he had always gotten special treatment. I went out with him one time in the field, and he was just about the worst person to be around. He was rude to me and snarky, saying lots of insults whenever I didn't close a sale. I thought to myself, how is this guy making sales? Well, as it turns out, there's a thing called a clawback, where someone makes a sale far out in a month, gets paid for it, but the person who made that purchase cancels the order. What Verizon then does is they literally claw back the money from the representative that owed them for that bad sale. They take their money back. What Rick was doing was being an aggressive asshole, forcing people by badgering them to sign the contract, and putting the install date so far in advance that he got paid weeks before it would get installed. So he ended up falling from grace like the sham he was, and owed Verizon a few $1,000s. He also had multiple complaints filed against him for his poor behavior and pushy attitude. Part 3. The Office. The best way to describe the office life was a cult, plain and simple. Everyone held the owner in such high regard, and everything he said was law. Men wanted to be him, and women wanted to be with him. Each day we would scream and yell chants like "opportunity," comparable to brain-dead zombies. We also had a thing every day where we would talk about our goals and what we wanted to do with our soon-to-be vast wealth. My dreams are what trapped me. My mother is a hard-working cancer survivor, and the bastards knew it. One of my goals was to retire my mother so she didn't have to work a day in her life anymore. They also knew that I was an actor with a passion for theater, and one of my dreams while working there was to open a theater company where I could perform all the shows I wanted without budget constraints and have children of lower income areas with no art in their schools come see my shows for free. That was an intense passion of mine, and Steve used it like a knife in my side every chance he would get to keep me slaving there. After the early morning meeting, we would go to the field. After that, we would come back, go home, and then in most cases, go out as a group. I always hated the group stuff, mainly because it was always around booze or food, which the owner never paid for. So the money I didn't have was going to be spent on more food and drinks. There was something oddly sexual about the office, too. The girls always seemed to have to tease men in a way that turned them into apes. There was always sexual talk when I was around Steve, how he wanted to bang other workers and new hires. Once I screamed at him for saying he wanted to have sex with a new girl who was 18. He was around 30. Some of the workers were dating each other. The owner said he didn't condone it, but it was pretty rampant throughout. Steve especially was very vile with his lustful tendencies. He never actually got laid while I was there. He was like a simp outside with boys' locker room talk, but I always called him out on his comments. One time we were at a pretty cool rave/EDM party in some house somewhere, and he decided he was going to make moves on one of the girls who was visiting from another office. She wanted nothing to do with him, and that was apparent. But he kept trying to get her drunk so she would loosen up. I smelled this disgusting sexual abuse a mile away, and I stepped in. I talked to the girl, who was very nice as well, and I took her home. I apologized to her profusely for his actions, like it was my fault for what he was doing. After I dropped her off, I went back to get him. It was a pretty sad sight. He was plastered. Absolutely gone. I had to carry him into my car and then up the stairs to his apartment. I put him on the bed and forced him to drink water. It was that moment I realized who he was. He wasn't necessarily an evil person. He was someone who makes mistakes in life and feels like he has to catch up to achieve his dreams. He was a sad, lonely man looking for friendship and love from people like him. For all the shit he put me through and all the things he did to me, I still remember that feeling as I saw him there and I pitied him. His past is no excuse for this kind of behavior, especially at the age of 30. But I never saw him the same way after that. He did apologize to me the next morning, but the damage was done. The other offices were just as bad, if not worse. I remember when I was there for about a week, I went with Steve to the office in Philadelphia, which shut down, by the way, where Steve came from initially. The office was run by a bald, short, vulgar man who I could never imagine having as a boss. He was nice in the office since we met for the first time, but later encounters showed me how cruel he was. That day we were graced by one of the consultants. This man looked like every other Cydcor elite. He gave a crappy speech about not being losers and how just to leave when a customer is mean to you. He gave a lot of corporate generic talk about working together for the goal to get what he has. Even then I thought he was full of crap. The only other office I went to was in New Jersey, twice. The first time was when I got promoted. The second time was right before I quit. Fun fact, the first time I went to New Jersey, there was a Gorillaz concert that I was promised that I could go to by the owner of the office. I drove 2 hours from New Jersey to go to the concert in Pennsylvania, but I had to be back the same morning to pick up the other employees that were there. So after the concert ended, I was forced to drive another 2 hours to New Jersey so I could take the people back from our office in that morning. The concert was great, but the owner told me how he allowed me to go because he knew how stressed I was. That did not stop him from working me half to death. The second time we were in New Jersey, we had a raging party where a woman who Steve knew was there. She was very sweet and friendly with me, but of course I didn't engage with her beyond general conversation. Steve, during that night, pushed me, hissed like a cat, and said, "Back off, she's mine." Needless to say, he didn't get anywhere with her, or any other women for that matter. Another toxic trait of the office culture was the competitive nature of it all. As I'm sure you know, to move up in the scheme, you need to interview people to get a crew under you. People would fight tooth and nail for these interviews. It was so competitive that some people would give up their only free day on Sunday to work the field and try to make extra money. I did do that a few times. I only conducted a few interviews myself, but I always felt bad for doing it. I always felt like I was lying to people, and I basically was because it was the same script that I was given before. There once was a gorgeous woman who interviewed with me, and I am so happy she knew when to turn and run. She was introducing in marketing, but not like the pyramid scheme kind of marketing. She was a temporary producer for an MTV show, I forget which one, but while I was impressed with her background, the other people in the office were more concerned with how attractive she was. I am so truly happy that she never came back. Part 4. Steve. By the time I left around October, I had hated Steve. He became to me an embodiment of the 7 deadly sins, full of lust, greed, wrath, envy, all in one package. When I started, he was charming enough to get me to start, but he was cruel enough to get me to stay. At any point, if I had doubt, he gave me this look like a serpent and would ask me, "Well, Kirk, you can quit, but what about your poor mother? Don't you want to retire her so she never has to work again? Don't you want her to pay you back for raising you?" And of course, trying to be a good son, the answer was always, "Yes, I do." But then he would pull out my personal dreams. "Don't you want enough money to open your own theater? What about those children, Kirk? You won't help those children in a 9-to-5 job. You'll never be an actor wealthy enough for any of that." He would then use the final point to really bring his point home. "What about your friends, Kirk? What about the friends you call brothers? Don't you want to have money to be able to spend time and money with them?" Like a sucker, this got me right in my emotions and always dragged me down to stay. Another story from Steve. When Steve had a crew of people under him, his empathy and concern for me had gone right out the window. In some aspects, it was like he was competing with me as well. One week I high-rolled him. I made more money than him. He flat out told me that he was embarrassed and jealous of me for that 1 week that I could perform better than him. He was jealous of a crew member performing well. The same week, I was promised an interview to try and build my own crew, but he ruined that too. Since he didn't have his own car and most of his crew didn't either, he had a new hire who was a very young mother, so he asked me to pick her up. I trusted him and went to pick her up before I got to the office. She took 30 minutes extra, even though I had arrived very early. I was late to the office, and the opportunity for the interview was taken from me. I talked a lot about him. He really did hurt me. He betrayed my trust, my friendship, and once I moved on, he just threw me away. The last thing he ever said to me was asking to hang out a month or so after I left. I never responded, and that was that. After they had made me miss a dear friend's wedding, I decided to leave. It was hard pulling myself free, but ultimately it was for the best. To my knowledge, some of them are still out there selling Verizon Fios, but I think they had to move to Maryland or one of the other states after their business fell, because after I left, they actually went under, which was pretty satisfying. I admit, I felt pretty good knowing that they failed and had to move on farther away from me. The psychological effects of my time there have been ongoing since. When I started the job, I was taking antidepressants, which they also made fun of me consistently. They called them happy pills, and whenever I'd talk about leaving or had a bad day, they would instruct me to take my happy pills and calm down. I had to stop taking the pills because I ran out of medication and could not afford therapy at the time, so I just had to stop taking them. Getting off the meds was difficult and taxing. This whole experience left me pretty untrusting of people in general. The trauma of being threatened so much while quite literally starving shifted my view of the world, and I came out a little darker on the other side. It kind of opened my eyes to how rough the real world can be. I regret my time there, and I do wish I never did it. I hope talking about it will bring me some peace, and hopefully other people out there might get out of the same trap that I found myself in. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. After the interview that I had, I did have some time to digest what I had said, and ultimately, it was a very relieved feeling that I had. It felt like a huge weight off my back, and I'll certainly make a video when the official interview comes out, but I just wanted to get my story out there. I don't know where these people are now. They could be in Maryland, they could be across the country for all I know. I cut ties with them, and I do not plan on ever engaging with them again. One thing that I would mention is that if you or someone you know or love is stuck in one of these fucking pyramid schemes, and it's run by a company that's like Cydcor or DS Max, or like one of these weird, strange sounding companies, get the fuck out. Leave. Do whatever you can to get that person to leave. You're not going to make any money. And I know from experience that it's only going to hurt you further in the long run. And, with that, I think this is probably going to be the last time that I'll mention this unless I really want to tell some more stories. Oddly enough, after I had gotten everything off my chest with the interview, something just kind of started to fade. It feels like a chapter that I had is finally able to close. I normally don't ask for this kind of thing, but if you do have stories about this Cydcor scheme or pyramid schemes that have screwed you over, I'd be curious to see what they would be, so let me know in the comments. I'm very open to discussion. If talking to me or talking to someone else is healing in any way, yeah, I'm more than happy to do it. I know how awful these things can really be to people, and my only wish is that those who have been hurt can recover and learn to move on. I know it's really dark, especially right now. But once you get out of it, it's so much better. It's so bright on the other side, and you can really start to feel like a person again, and not just some machine used as a money farm. I thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys real soon in the next one.